Welcome to our second hour of Preserving Persimmons. We're going to cover some different topics, chutneys, pickles, and vinegars, and we're glad to see you back. Just a few preliminary things. That's one of the kinds. These are hachiyas, but that was this year's fall. They come in all together. I'm Marina Shea. I'll be your MC this evening. Nina Hoyman is going to be our chat monitor, and so feel free to put anything, type any questions into the chat, or you can communicate with her specifically, or you can just raise your hand, or you can speak up. And we'll try to take questions at different points along the way, and hopefully have a little time at the end. Basic Zoom etiquette: please keep your mics muted when you're not speaking. You may improve your bandwidth by using your speaker and not your gallery view, or turn your video off if you want. As Travis pointed out, the program is being recorded and will be posted on our website, and so just bear that in mind. There will be a recipe fact sheet, and this slide deck will be sent to you after you submit the post-program survey, and that will appear at the end. Okay. So who are we? The UC Master Food Preserver online program is a community outreach, online-based, grant-funded, volunteer program at the University of California Cooperative Extension that provides up-to-date research-based information on food safety and preservation. I'm not going to read you the legalese at the bottom, but I just want to emphasize that we are all volunteers. Nobody's receiving anything for these services. We have been trained by the University of California, but we are not expressing the University of California's views, thoughts, and opinions when we say anything. And any products or services that we might mention or that might be in our photographs is not an implied endorsement by UC. So our mission is to keep it as Californians, but that's when the program started. It's all people, obviously, safe and well, and to use culturally appropriate research-based practices to safely preserve food in the home. And that reduces food waste, increases food security, and provides engaging ways for people to explore healthy food. So we will constantly be referring back to what is research-based or what we know has been tested. Today's agenda. Our goal today is to make you recipe ready for you to safely preserve at home. We're going to cover talking about that, our master food preserver on chutney, canned and no sugar, and also regular sugar persimmon jams. Helen Yee will be doing the deep dive into jams. And then I'm going to finish up with some spiced fuyu repairs and persimmon flavored vinegars and shrubs. Just a note, we did have the Persimmon Preserving Hour 1 last month. It was on November 14th, and we covered there the types and ripenesses of persimmons, so when you're able to use them. I just want to give you a tiny little pause and say, if you look at this photograph, you can see that the sort of darker orange ones here, they have the pointy little tip. Those are the astringent types of persimmons, and sometimes you have to treat those differently. They are not ripe until they get all soft and mushy and gushy. And then the sort of flat-bottomed ones that look kind of like an orange tomato in the photograph on the right are the non-astringent or sweet variety of persimmon, which can be eaten hard and crisp like an apple, or they can be allowed to go mushy or be mashed up as well. We typically will refer to those as hachiyas because that's the most common commercially available astringent pointy variety, and fuyus, which is the most commonly available sweet variety. But there are lots and lots of other varieties that you might find, particularly in markets like in California. But so when we say fuyu or hachiya, we're really shorthanding for those categories. All right. Last month, we also covered freezing, dehydrating leathers and slices, and drying whole hoshigaki. So if any of those topics are of interest to you, there's a recorded program with a handout, and you can go get that off of our main website, or here's the YouTube link, and we can also provide that to you, of course, in the deck. Now, having said that, we ended last month with drying whole hoshigaki, hoshigaki. And so before we jump into today's agenda, because hoshigaki is a very long drying process, we're going to get a brief update from Deirdre on the hoshigaki process. That is the drying of whole hachiyas. And then she's going to go right on into our first topic of chutney. Deirdre. You're muted.
Hi, I apologize for my picture being a little dark. I'm doing this in an area in my car right now, but anyway, so yeah, so I started these hoshigaki I'm on November 4th, and as you see in those pictures, it's basically it's a process of drying whole peeled hachiya persimmons. As you see, the idea is that they dry on the outside, kind of forming a skin, and then you're slowly breaking up the inside by sort of pressing on it and massaging it a little every day until it dries. And yeah, you can go next. Yeah, so this was kind of the transition. When it's done, it looks like this picture on the left. When you see them, in a store or something, they do have a bloom of sugar on them. This is when they first, when they're dry enough that you can take them down if you want. Some people will leave them up and let them develop that sugar bloom while they're up, but I like to do a lot of them, so I take them down. I put them into a container and I put them in the garage, and then they form the bloom really quickly. And I actually have them here. I was going to say that I could show you how they look. They're completely covered in the sugar bloom now. So let's see if I can, I'm actually going to try to find my picture. There's my picture. Okay, so let's see, how am I going to do this? So if you see, they're completely white. Oh, there they are. And that's just from being in a cold environment, and that's kind of the end of the process. Anyway, so that is that. Okay. And I dried them, and they were when they were done, and those are all the ones that I pulled down. I started with some that were a little on the smaller side, so they dried very quickly. It was a good time to do it. It was in the beginning of November. It was still warm, warm outside, and we got a lot of sun. And I had them in a window of the dining room, so it was everything kind of lined up, kind of perfect scenario to have this happen without any issues or anything. But there definitely can be issues. So, if you try this, definitely start with small ones. Don't try to do big ones, and try to do it as early as possible in the season, like in the beginning of November kind of thing. You want to get them when they're really firm. But all of that has gone over in the first class workshop. Yeah. So that's it. Okay, so one of the things I thought would be really interesting to do is to make a chutney, and this is with the fuyu persimmons. It seems like these trees just produce such an incredible amount of fruit there that you look for every possible thing you could think of to do with them. And this was a really great great recipe because it has a lot of options to do. But what is a chutney in the first place? It's a condiment or spread made with fruits, vegetables, vinegar, sugar, and spices. It originated in India and was a way to preserve the autumn harvest. It uses both sugar and vinegar to preserve. It may be chunky or smooth and mild to spicy, and it can be used as an ingredient in a dish, served on the side, or used as a spread in a sandwich or on crackers. And it pairs well with meat, fish, curries, and cheese. It's really nice to have on a cheese platter. It's like, you can have it with charcuterie or salami, but you can also have it with the cheeses or brie. It's kind of a nice kind of something different. Yeah. So this chutney was really a much more was an Indian influenced chutney. It had a lot of ingredients. It and I would say the first thing, yeah, you want to do is definitely to gather your ingredients, because there's quite a few, and if you start measuring or start the recipe and then you realize you have to go find something else. So you have curry powder, coriander seed, so whole seed, garam masala powder, mustard seed, it could be brown or yellow, brown sugar, apple cider vinegar, white wine, and that could be whatever, Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Grigio, persimmons, raisins, pear, that's a Comise pear from our tree, a little red onion, Meyer lemon. I have honey, which is actually from our bees, and some fresh ginger. So those are all the ingredients, and it's pretty simple. Then you just want to, you prep all your ingredients. You do want to make sure that everything is prepped and measured out before you you start. You're going to dice the persimmons, dice the pears, mince the onions. You're going to use the juice of the lemon, grate the ginger, and then measure out all the rest of your ingredients. And then you just dump it all into a pot, and you start to let it cook. So there's a picture of it on the left of the, that's just all the ingredients in I put it in like an 8-quart pot. It said, the recipe says 6-quart, but I was a little concerned that I didn't want to fill it all the way up to the top, and then, even if it was going to reduce. So I gave it a little mix. And that's having it all mixed up in it right when I started. And then you just want to cook it down, and you're cooking it down. The recipe had called for an hour, and I thought, wow, I don't think I'm going to be cooking this for an hour, but I did end up cooking it for an hour. There's a lot of water in the pears and in the persimmons, so it really took some time to really break all that down. And the fuyus are very firm, and it does take time. Although what's nice about it is that they still maintain their shape. So just cook it down, place everything in the pot and simmer. You can go to the next. And that is it simmering. And you want to when you're simmering, you just want to have a few bubbles going. You don't want to be boiling too hard, but you just want to have kind of a nice little tickle going on, just a few little bubbles going. And you're just going to leave it there. You're going to stir it every once in a while and just let it cook down. So I think that picture was after 20 minutes. Is that right? I think I had can you go to the next slide? Oh, I can't. Oh, sorry, Marina. Sorry, I can't hear you. Oh, there you go. After 20 minutes, and then that's after 1 hour. So it really cooked down. But you could still see that it maintains a lot of the shapes of everything, which is nice. And yeah, and then you can, this is a refrigerator style, so then you can just store it in the refrigerator. And there's a finished product. It is actually cooked down, and it is pretty firm, and but it does, what's really nice about it, it's really pretty. It maintains a lot of the shapes of everything. And served with grilled chicken, warm brie, Indian food, add it to a sandwich, or get creative. So that's it.
Deirdre, thank you so much for that. I'm not
Sure.
sure. I hope that your little movie played.
Oh,
We were having technical,
okay.
but anyway,
We have
Deirdre
one question. We have one question.
I was
Okay.
going to ask for questions now.
And if that person would like to ask their question, otherwise I will ask it for them. And the question is, can I assume that it is okay to use golden raisins if a consistent color palette is desired?
Oh, yeah, you can use whatever you want. Yeah, that's fine too. Currants are fine. If you don't have them, you could do diced apricots or diced figs, but yes, that's perfectly fine.
Great. Are there other questions for Deirdre on either hoshigaki or the chutneys? She is graciously joining this as she's missing another event that she has to leave for, and so she will not be here at the end for questions. So now is the time. Okay, well, Deirdre, thank you for giving us your time
Sure.
now, and we'll do our best to
Sure.
field any questions for you if they come in belatedly.
Okay, sounds good. All right. Okay, well, I'll
Thank
see you.
you.
Thank you. Okay, sure. Bye-bye.
All right, Helen, I'm going to turn it over to you for canning persimmon jam.
Okay. So first, since we're talking about jam and canning, I thought I'd go over a little bit as to what is jam. It's just mashed fruit with a gelling agent. Canning is a process of filling properly prepared clean jars with properly prepared food and heating the filled jars in a canner at a temperature hot enough and long enough to kill bacteria and other pathogens. Next slide. So since we are talking about canning, the first question that should be raised is this high acid canning or is this low acid canning? Because that determines what kind of canner we can use for our project. So most fruit and fruit jams are high acid, although there are charts available that categorize pH in the foods. We need to be careful about using non-research based recipes because of possible fluctuations with the pH. Because in order to qualify as a high acid food, it has to be 4.6 pH or lower. And the reason why that's important is because the pathogens in the food can be killed at 212 degrees Fahrenheit at sea level. If it's a high acid food. And in that case, we can use a boiling water canner or an atmospheric steam canner. But if the pH is higher than 4.6, then we need to use a pressure canner because we need temperatures that are over 240 to 250 degrees Fahrenheit in order to kill Clostridium botulinum, which is the bacteria that creates spores that causes botulism, and which you all know can cause serious health problems and even death. But the safest way to deal with canning is just to use reputable recipes because the researchers have already experimented with the different pH levels in the food and come to and have reached safe levels of pH so that we can actually follow whichever method is in the recipe, and the food that comes out, we can be basically reassured that it's safe. Yeah, I also should mention that if on another day you decide to cook some low acid foods, like seafoods or meat, dairy, vegetables, then you cannot use the high acid method of boiling water because basically the pathogen that causes botulism really likes being in let me start over. This particular bacteria that creates these spores really thrives in low acid, non-oxygen environments, such as sealed jars of low acid foods. The spores of these bacteria can cause botulism, but they can't actually proliferate at these higher temperatures, and these bacteria cannot live in high acid environments. Next slide. So now that we've determined that we're using high acid canning, there are two methods that we can use, either boiling water or atmospheric steam. Both reach temperatures of 212 degrees Fahrenheit, which is enough to kill the bacteria and pathogens in high acid foods. But people have different preferences as to which one is better. Atmospheric steam to me is just easier. It can reach temperatures of 212 degrees quicker. You use less water and it's an energy saver. For boiling water, you can use any pot in your kitchen. As long as it's deep enough, you can put a rack in it, put the jars on top, and there's enough boiling water to cover 1 to 2 inches, then you're set to go. Usually when you're given the choice between the two, if the processing time exceeds 45 minutes, boiling water canning is better because you have the risk of the water in the steam canner evaporating if you are actually processing for 45 minutes or longer. So in those situations, boiling water is preferred. And while you're doing the atmospheric steam canning, do not open the lid to check to see if you have enough water, because a sudden drop in the canner temperature means that you're no longer at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, and you have to start the processing time all over again after it reaches full steam. Next slide. So the question today, well, I think I skipped a slide. Okay, so we're going to cover 2 jams today, low sugar and traditional sugar. And these 2 types of jams will be using 2 different types of pectin. The traditional sugar, you have to activate the pectin with a huge amount of sugar and citric acid with the pectin in order to create the gel. With traditional sugar, you actually need about 65 to 68% sugar in the jam. So for health reasons, a lot of times people don't prefer this method. But the sugar is necessary in this type of jam because it binds with the free water molecules and it makes the water molecules unavailable for harmful microorganisms. So the cross-link binding action with the sugar and water combined with the pectin and citric acid is what forms the gel. From a food preserver perspective, increasing the sugar,
Literally said
the availability, the harmful microorganisms need to cause food to. And
People are going to touch it.
I think somebody needs to turn off their volume. Sugar can also shift the pH of water towards acidic when dissolved, so you'll have a longer shelf life, and you can safely eat well past the best by dates. With low sugar, no sugar jams, they use a modified pectin, and you do not need to use any sugar at all. All you need is to include some of the calcium that's in the packet, and it creates that gel. But because there's no preservative effect from the sugar, it will spoil quicker. So you should use small jars when using this type of jam. They usually last about a year or 3 weeks after opening if kept in the refrigerator. The advantages of low sugar, no sugar is that it's healthier, it's really delicious, and the fresh flavor of the fruit really pops out, and it's not masked by overwhelming amounts of sugar like the high sugar jam recipes. Another thing that's good about low sugar jams is you can use any sweetener you like, artificial or natural, or no sugar, or regular sugar. You still get a great jam. Next. So the next question is, since we're working with persimmons, are they safe for high acid canning? And it turns out persimmons are borderline low acid. They usually range from 4.4 pH to 4.7 pH. And as you recall, we need a 4.6 pH or lower to be considered high acid foods. So what the researchers have done is they've added some acidity to the recipe. And you'll see as we move on, and this actually ups the level of acid enough so that this can be safely canned in the in the boiling water method. Now, we have to actually explore a little bit about the difference between bottled lemon or lime juice or fresh lemon or lime juice. Usually, if the recipe doesn't specify, we should use bottled lemon or lime juice because there is a standardized acidity in those cases. When a recipe calls for fresh lemon or lime juice, then you really, like in the second recipe, then we really should be using full acid lemons or limes, such as Eureka or Lisbon lemons, or Tahitian and Persian limes. Next slide. So I'm going to start with the modified pectin persimmon jam recipe because I just think this jam tastes a lot better. And we're going to be using the atmospheric steam canner because I just think it's a lot easier to use. Next slide. So first you have to clean your work area, gather and clean your tools. First picture is of the atmospheric steam canner. You fill regular water up to the rack line, and the rack is included in the canner, so you're all set to go as soon as the item you receive the item in the mail. You wait for the water to boil. The steam pours out of the side portholes on the dome lid when the steam is at 212 degrees, and you start your processing for 10 minutes. Next one is a picture of any stock pot you can use for your boiling water canner, as long as it's deep enough for the rack and the jars, and to put water 1 or 2 inches above the jars. You could get the standard black water canner at any of these warehouse discount stores, including the rack, and it's only like $25. The third picture is of my favorite rack, and I like this rack because you can put your half-pint jars on it. It's kind of a flower shape, and there's enough water circulating below the jars, around the jars, and between the jars so that it's processed correctly. And when you're not canning half-pint or pint-sized jars, you could turn the rack over and you can put quart-sized jars on it for the same thing. Next, you need a funnel. This is my favorite kind of funnel, which is, I think Marina called it a skirted funnel. And they actually have like a plastic part inside that goes inside the jar. And then the white portion goes outside the jar with measurements on the outside as to headspace that you would need. And these are really great because you can actually not only see from the outside, but you could look inside to see what level it is. And if you need more, you put another spoonful in, or if it's too much, you could take a spoonful out. But when you remove the funnel, the lid is clean, and the ridges on the rim are clean. So you can save yourself that extra step of, having a very messy jam situation. If you don't have a skirted funnel, you can look at the next picture, which is your standard headspace ruler. And again, it measures the amount of jam, level of jam that you need to leave on top. And on the other side of this ruler is a debubbler, and you should run the debubbler slowly around the side of the jar to remove any air pockets in the food. And something about the set that I'm showing you is that they come in a complete set, and it's very economical online. The next, you need a ladle. This ladle is exactly half a pint, so it's very convenient for canning half-pint jars of jam. The next picture is a magnetic lid tool. You need that because a lot of times you put your lid in boiling water to keep it ready for when you're ready to put the lids on and you don't want to put your hand in hot water. The last picture is of a jar lifter, self-explanatory. It's hot, so you don't really want to mess with that. And there's a jar lifter that does a great job with that. Next picture. So as Deirdre said, you always gather and measure your ingredients first, because the last thing you want is to have this project started and you realize you don't have enough of one ingredient midway. So you always prepare all your ingredients ahead of time before you start. I want you to notice that in this first recipe, they asked for bottled water, bottled lemon juice, which is interesting compared to the second recipe, which calls for fresh. Since persimmons are very sweet, I use the least amount of honey possible, which here is half cup. So technically this is a no sugar recipe, but for those who prefer, you can use this type of pectin and go full sugar. Next picture. So with all of this Pomona's pectin jam, this no sugar jam, the jam is activated by calcium water. So inside the box, there's a little packet where you mix with water, you shake it, and then you measure the amount for your recipe. Next. And then you multitask. You wash your jars with hot soapy water. You heat the jars in the atmospheric steam canner. You prepare the lids in boiling water. And you turn off the heat and prepare the jam. Next picture. So here's a picture that's pretty self-explanatory. You take the calyx off of the persimmons in the first picture. The second one, you peel, chop, and mash or puree the persimmons. And because they're rather hard, you can add a little bit of water to soften it up. Then you just add an immersion blender and you just puree the whole thing until soft. Next, you measure four cups of mashed puree, put in the jam pot, add 4 teaspoons of calcium water, add half cup lemon juice, turn on stove and bring the mixture to a full boil. And I need to mention that a full boil means that not just when the mixture starts to boil, but it boils so hard that even if you stir it, it will not simmer down. So it's really bubbling like crazy. On the side, you're measuring, since I prefer to use honey, you're measuring into a dish, you're adding the pectin, you're mixing the pectin well into the sweet, because if you don't, it will clump later. You set that aside. Again, you bring everything to a full boil, can't be stirred down. You add the honey pectin mixture. You stir vigorously for 1 to 2 minutes only until the pectin is completely dissolved and the jam comes to a full boil. You remove from the heat. And this right here is your no sugar modified pectin persimmon jam. You can put the jars and refrigerate for 3 weeks. You can put in jars, refrigerate for 3 weeks, or you could put in jars with no shoulders and freeze for up to 4 months. But make sure you have a 1/2 inch headspace, because when the food expands as it's freezing, you don't want the jars with shoulders because it could crack it. Next slide. So now we're going to can this to even preserve it longer than refrigeration and freezing. And to do that, you repeat some steps that are already covered. You ladle the food into jars, leaving a 1/4 inch headspace, remove the air bubbles, if any, and you debubble. You wipe the rims clean. I made a mess and the jam is sticky, so sometimes it's best to wipe the rims with vinegar so that there's a nice clean surface and the lids can properly seal. Next, you use the magnetic lid tool, take it out of the hot water, place it neatly on the prepared jars, and then you put the bands on, turn finger tight, which means you hit resistance and then you turn a little bit more. You don't want this to be too tight because we still need the air to escape during processing. You put the jars in the atmospheric steam canner, you cover, you bring to a full boil. As I mentioned, it comes to a full boil when the steam fills the entire dome, can, or lid. The steam shoots out of the 2 steam portholes on the side. At that point, you set the timer for 10 minutes. You add 1 minute for each 1,000 feet above sea level. Do not open the lid until done processing, and we already went over why. So what is happening inside the canner is that the food inside the jars is expanding and pushing out all the air that's in the headspace and killing the harmful microorganisms in the food. So after 10 minutes of this processing, turn off the stove and wait 5 minutes. And the reason we should wait 5 minutes is there's this thing called siphoning, which occurs when the liquid comes out of the jars due to too rapid change in air pressure or temperature. So we just want to leave the whole thing alone for 5 minutes and let it settle down by itself. Next slide. And then after 5 minutes, we remove from the canner and we carefully lift the jars up, over, and down onto a tray. Do not put them on a cold surface because, again, the difference in temperature could cause the jars to break. Do not tilt the jars. Let jars cool for 12 to 24 hours undisturbed. And as the food in the jars are cooling, the food contracts. And that contraction creates a vacuum in the headspace. And that vacuum will pull down the lid to create that seal that we want. After cooling, put your finger in the middle of the lid to check the seal. Lid should not move at all, and the button in the middle should be sucked down. At that point, you can label and store. If it's not sealed properly, you just put it in the refrigerator and eat within 3 weeks. Next slide. For the traditional sugar, it's a similar process, but I wanted to just point out a few differences. Next slide. I think I'm a little, okay. Notice the huge amount of sugar that this recipe calls for. 6 cups of sugar to 3 cups of fruit. And this is what we're eating when we have our jar of jam. And frankly, I think that the amount of sugar in these types of jams, it overwhelms the flavor of the fruit. And notice how this recipe allows for fresh lemon juice. And this could be due to the large amounts of sugar, perhaps changing the acidity of this recipe. In any case, this is a reputable recipe. It's research and can be found on the Master Food Preserver website. And we are going to be using a boiling water canner to can this. So again, same idea. You can multitask by bringing the water to a boil in the canner, and you put the rack in there, you simmer it while you are washing the jars, lids, bands, and hot soapy water. And you rinse, then you add the clean jars to the canner to sterilize for 10 minutes, and you simmer. And then you pour boiling water on the lids off heat and let it stand in the hot water as you're preparing the jam. Next slide. So it's the same as the first recipe for preparing for prepping the persimmons. You remove the calyx, chop, and puree. They specifically say do not use the peels. Measure 3 cups of puree, put in a jam pot, add water, add lemon juice. And this recipe calls for putting the pectin directly into the fruit mix. Then you add the butter to reduce foaming, bring to a rolling boil, stir in sugar, return to a full boil for exactly 4 minutes, stirring constantly so that it doesn't burn. Because there's so much sugar in the recipe, it does burn more easily. With the mixture will start to become a more translucent orange color, and foam will start developing on the top. You remove it from the heat, you skim the foam if you like. The foam is edible. It can also be stirred into the mixture if clear jam is not required. If you would like clearer jam, you just use a silicone brush to brush it aside and then remove. And this is your traditional sugar persimmon jam, ready to eat, refrigerate, or freeze. Next slide. If you wish to can it, it's the same as the other recipe. You need a 1/4 headspace. You wipe the rims. You place the jars on a rack in the canner Jar tops should be submerged by at least 1 to 2 inches of boiling water. Add boiling water as necessary. Cover, wait for a gentle boil. At that time, you can process for 10 minutes. Turn off the stove, let it rest for 5 minutes, as we've already discussed. Remove jars the same way, up, over, down on not a cold surface. Let cool for 12 to 24 hours. Check seals. You want to label, including the date and the type of canner used. These are just, next slide, these are just some ideas that you can use for the jams. Something that's really great for the holidays is you could just get a gift bag, put a ribbon on the jam, put a tea towel, box of crackers, or a scone mix, and they make a great gift. And I believe that's it. Here are the website for UC Master Food Preserver, the links to the 2 recipes. And now I think we're turning it over to Marina.
We have some great questions here.
Okay.
You've inspired people.
Okay.
I'm going to encourage anybody who had one of those questions to unmute. And I know there's at least one person who wanted me to ask for them. So please unmute and ask your question for Helen about canning and jamming.
Hi, Helen. This is Denise. I was just curious. I've seen a lot of recipes online for using not using pectin to make persimmon jam. And I just don't know if those are research based or if they're approved. I was wondering if you knew.
Well, we actually, our position with the Master Food Preservers is we always direct people to the reputable recipes, either through universities or research centers or pectin companies or through canning companies, because we know that all those recipes have been researched and tested for pH. And although we see a lot of great recipes online, we don't know exactly what those combinations of ingredients, what the ultimate pH is. And so if you're not confident and you're doing low acid or high acid canning on something that's a low acid food, that could be a safety issue. So
Well,
we
I
always
guess that was my question, is if there are any research-based recipes for persimmon jam without pectin that can be recommended by Master Food Preservers.
Well, my understanding of pectin is that it's the gelling agent to create jam. So without the gelling agent, it really wouldn't be jam. It would just be puree.
Old recipes use that cooking down method to make jams rather than using pectin.
It sounds like you already have the answer then.
It's just somebody different.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, certainly you could reduce anything on the stove and take out all the liquid and make it thick. I mean, if that's what you like, but it's not necessarily, that's not gelling that's occurring. And I'm actually putting forward these 2 recipes that are approved and reputable because they do have that gelling component. I'm not quite sure about the other recipes you're talking about.
Thank you.
And Marina has made a comment about non-pectin jams that could be put in the refrigerator. Next person with a question that put it in the chat. Feel free to chime in.
So Helen, this is Bonnie New.
Hello.
And I have been canning for many, many years, particularly water bath, but I also do pressure canning. And I recently made persimmon jam for the first time using Pomona pectin for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found was my end result was way too stiff. And I had a very distinct flavor of fake lemon.
Of what?
Fake lemon coming from the bottled lemon juice. And so I didn't know how much of that was because I'm using Pomona for the first time and it just has a different flavor because there's so much less sugar, or if that was because the persimmons are different than a lot of other fruit.
Well, I know that Pomona's pectin uses citrus as their pectin, whereas a lot of these other commercial pectins also use apple skin. I know Pomona's is 100% natural and they strictly use citrus, but something that might be happening, because this happened to me the first time I used Pomona's, is that when I mix the calcium, when I first mixed the calcium water, I mistakenly thought you put the amount of calcium that they say in the recipe instead of mixing it with water and putting the calcium water, like 3 teaspoons. And that creates this very stiff jam because now the recipe has too much calcium. But I don't know if that's actually what you did. But the times that I followed those Pomona pectin recipes, they come out delicious. I mean, it's just the flavor really pops. And I know some of this bottled lemon water, lemon juice, I guess you're afraid that there's some preservatives in there. Is that what you're saying?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get what you last asked.
You said that there was a fake lemon taste to your jam? And you
Yes,
thought it was
it
from the
kind of,
bottled lemon?
yes, it overtook the persimmon flavor.
I don't know what to tell you on that one.
Okay, or maybe you could just address this, the stiffness of the jam. Was that, you think, I mean, I followed the recipe exactly, but do you think perhaps I overcooked it, or I don't know.
Here's the thing, a lot of people, like if you overcook it, you've basically you're reducing the liquid. And so when, you know, like the person who asked the question before, when you reduce the liquid, it does create a thicker food. And so whether you want to reduce the liquid the first way and have a non-pectin jam, or you reduce the liquid the second way with the pectin, you're going to have a thicker food. So I'm not quite sure what you are doing to create a thick jam, but usually if things come out too thick, you just add, I know we actually advocate for not modifying these jam recipes at all and to follow them strictly because they've been researched, but usually if it's kind of like a difference in liquid, you could probably figure out a way to balance it out.
We did have a
Unfortunately, by the time it was already too thick, I had canned it and then I'd opened it. And so, you know, I'm kind of stuck with this. It tasted okay, but you'd have to stir it vigorously
Lonnie, I'm gonna
before you could use it.
By the way, if anybody in the audience wants to jump in and answer any of these questions because you're very experienced making jam, please feel free.
We did have one
with
comment just from an experienced canner who said that they understood that you don't have to put the lids in boiling water, and in fact, it's not recommended for the adhesive on the jar lids. So is that everybody's understanding, right?
Yes.
That was my understanding as well, but that's not what the recipe says. And since we are teaching a program that follows reputable recipes, I'm going with the recipe. But it was my understanding as well, just taking programs with the master food preservers, that you don't need to boil those lids anymore. But
Yeah.
I'm following the recipe.
I think
Yeah, I think that's
correct.
a manufacturer thing.
I'm going to step in now just because we are running short on time. And I think I'm going to, we can either just
we do have
cut
more
off
questions, though.
Okay, so do we want to just cut off the refrigerator pickles portion of the program and just stay with jam, which we can do? That's fine.
I think this one question is particularly relevant, which is, can aspartame be used, and what artificial sweetener is best? How about Splenda? And I do have an answer for that, and that's that we do recommend that you use the pectin manufacturer's recipes if you want to use artificial sweeteners. And in a traditional pectin recipe, artificial sweeteners cannot be used. The sugar is required to form the gel. But for the modified pectin, like the Pomonas, artificial sweeteners can be used. and preferably Splenda sucralose is the generic name for it, or stevia. You should not use aspartame because it loses its sweetness, and saccharin sweeteners shouldn't be used because they can make it bitter. So I hope that answers that one important question. There was a question, can you use Sure Gel and can you use Mrs. Wages? Do they contain calcium?
Well, those are different types of pectin, and I imagine you would need different recipes for those types of pectins. Those two types of pectin are not included in our approved recipes for persimmon jam. You can certainly use it on your own and put it in the refrigerator or freezer, but for canning, those are not two pectins that are part of our canned recipes.
Okay, so those are, anyway, that's the end of the questions from canning and jams. Thank you very much, Helen. And there is at least one person has said, please do the pickles.
Could I ask a question quickly about persimmon jam browning? I was told that a lot of times that you don't get a pretty color, but it turns brown.
Acid will help with browning some, but over time you definitely can lose your color.
I'm sorry, I missed the first part. What help?
Putting a little ascorbic acid in
okay.
can help persimmons hold color.
Okay,
but
thank you.
over time it will brown.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Travis, let me just check in with you very quickly. I know that you want to have the post-program survey, and I know some people will have to be jumping off because we have reached 7:30. Is it okay if we extend for those people who want to stay on? And can you get the survey to anyone who needs to log off now?
Yeah, we started past the hour. We started a couple minutes after when we said we would, so we have at least 10 minutes. I would go on with the pickles. If there's other questions for the past topics, I'm going to ask Nina to save those and we'll respond via email. But yeah, let's proceed with the pickles and let's give it 10 minutes. Okay. If we go over that, I'll step in, but I appreciate it if everyone could stay with us. There is a survey at the end, but we're going to get back finish with the pickles.
And if you can't make that, you can be in touch with the program and make sure that we get you the materials. All right, so let's jump back into sharing on pickles, and these are so simple, so this can go fast. Spiced refrigerator pickle. All right, you want to start with very, very firm, ripe Fuyu persimmons. That is, unless you like mushy pickles, but most people really kind of like some crisp in them. You can use any non-astringent persimmon for this. Your ingredients are very simple. You need your persimmons, you need vinegar. Some recipes will allow you to also use water. So what's important about the vinegars here, and somebody in the comment made the comment that the trivia question was a trick question. It kind of is. Your vinegar has to be at least 5% concentration. And most commercial vinegars out there, your sort of typical distilled white vinegar, your apple cider vinegars, are going to be at least 5% concentration. But be careful and read the labels. One of the reasons why you want to go with a commercial product is then you'll know the percentage of your acid in your vinegar, like a homemade fermented vinegar, or occasionally you'll find like some wine vinegars or rice wine vinegars will fall below that level. And you do want to maintain that. You can go with a 50-50 if you can take the vinegar, if it's at least 5%, into a half concentration in the liquid in a refrigerator pickle. Now, what is very important here is that these are pickles that will only be stored in a refrigerator. You are not going to be canning these. You're not going to be putting them on the shelf. The refrigeration is going to be a key part of keeping this product safe. And the vinegar levels will be adequate if you're going to use a refrigerator pickle. Okay, water if it's in there. And I've actually found some of these recipes are just a little too puckery and acidic when they use 100% vinegar. And so I have included a recipe that has some water in it. Sugar, this is purely for taste. It will help keep the flute integrity a little bit, but it is not a safety issue. So if you want to substitute, Damara or brown sugar or honey, you can go ahead with that. And then your spices, and there's a whole range of flavors, and you can play with them. Again, the critical portion is having your 5% bitter be at least 50% of your liquid. All right. Tools, pretty simple. You're going to sterilize your jars. That's boiling them for 10 minutes, unless you live somewhere high up, then add a minute for each additional 1,000 feet over sea level. And that's just to get your jars as clean as possible to start with. I mean, we're not going to be sterilizing after the fact. So this is not going to be a sterile product, but it will help. And then you wash your lids in warm soapy water. And then you've got sort of your basic kind of canning and chopping materials here. Nothing fancy. All right, you wash the fruit, you cut off the cowlick, you peel. That's optional, but I think it probably makes a better product, just in terms of the overall texture of the fuyu persimmon, to have it be peeled. Sometimes fuyus will have seeds. Take those out if you at least don't want your guests, chomping on them. And then you can cut them however you like, round slices, wedges, do whatever makes you happy here. You can wash and prep any of your spices. Again, get everything ready in advance. You do want the pieces to be relatively uniform, at least if you want just the flavor penetration to be similar. And then you just pack your fruit in your jars. You bring all of the other ingredients to boil. That's basically your vinegar mixture with your sugar and your spices. Make sure that the sugar is dissolved. You can bring it up to a boil. You don't have to prolong it after that. You just pour the hot vinegar right over the fruit. That hot pack will help a little bit with, floating fruit. But if you put your jar pretty full, then it usually works. Clean your rims, cap them tightly, label them, and refrigerate. It is that simple. Now, note, there is not a tested recipe, at least that I could find, for shelf-stable persimmon pickles, like the ability to boiling water or steam can them and keep them on the shelf all year. I didn't find one that was approved, and so refrigerator pickles is kind of where we're at. But that does give you all the joy of flexibility. All right. You can use them anytime after, 24 hours. It depends on how sour you want your pickles to be. Keep testing them. They'll evolve over time. They go well in salads. One of the cookbook authors recommended bitter kale or kale slaw, bitter greens. The pressed duck on the right was Thanksgiving this year. It went really well with duck. There's a little salmon there on the bottom. Don't read your vinegar for more pickles. It's the concentrations have all changed, but it is very flavorful, and you might find it fun to use in cooking or drinks. So simple. Vinegar and shrubs, this is one more step, basically. Again, no tested approved recipe for fermenting persimmon vinegar, though, but you can flavor a commercial vinegar with persimmon fruit. It is actually much faster. It's very easy. It's safe. You can use any kind of vinegar you want. The apple cider vinegar tends to go very well with fruits if you don't mind the darker color. White vinegar gives you that nice, clean color background. I think rice vinegar pairs nicely with persimmons, and you can use red, white wine vinegars, etc. The red vinegar is probably a little too competitive with the flavor of the fruit. And just be aware that rice vinegars and wine vinegars have a little more protein in them, and so they may tend to go off faster than just your straight apple cider and white vinegars. Here you want fully ripe. You can use fuyus, or you can use hachia persimmons, the mushy one, when they're fully ripe. And you want to use about 1 or 2 cups of fruit to each pint of vinegar. 2 ingredients, that's it, vinegar and fruit. So what do? You sterilize your jars or your bottles. You're going to wash and chop your fuyus if you're using them, or you can, get gelatinous hachia pulp. So that's what you see in the middle photo there. You heat the vinegar to just below boiling. And if you don't have a thermopen, ask for it for Christmas, because these things are wonderful. It gives you the exact temperature. You want to be somewhere between 190, 195, and then you just mix that with your fruit in your jars. And then you can store it in a cool, dark place, undisturbed, for 2 to 4 weeks or so. It's like, keep tasting it and see what you want. All right, I'm changing my earbuds, I'm hoping. Okay, so once you've got the flavor where you want it, you're going to strain the vinegar. If you want to be a purist about it, you can run it through like a nut bag. That's what you see underneath my metal strainer here. You're not going to get perfect clarity, but you can decide, what matters to you. You can also just strain it and then let it settle, and then pour off the top, and and throw out the sediment. it's perfectly edible, but it's just a visual thing. Best used in 3 months. If you refrigerate the vinegar, you can probably hold the nice flavor for 6, even 9 months. Eventually, it'll sort of pale and just become kind of like vinegar and not have as much flavor. One more step, you can use your vinegars then, salad dressings, brine, fish meats, and so on. Or one more step, if you want to make it a drinkable vinegar, shrubs are all the rage. And all you have to do here is add sugar. So you're going to use about 2 parts of sugar to 3 parts of your strained persimmon flavored vinegar. You're going to mix those together and bring them to a boil enough to dissolve the sugar fully. And then that's it. You really don't want to keep cooking your vinegar that much. And you pour it into a sterilized jar, label it, cap it tightly, again, store it in the refrigerator for up to 3 months. And that's good in, drinks. You can actually use it in desserts. Somebody had recipes for like putting weird cream things for mocktails, whatever. And that's it. Got a pile of references. You'll get those in the handout as well. Let me just tell you that there are some online programs coming up. There's Preserving Pomegranates next Wednesday in the evening. And then there are regular Ask a Master Food Preserver programs on the first Wednesday of the month. January is New Year's, so it's 1 month later. Again, these are all available on this website, both live and online programs. There are more opportunities if you want to become a UC Master Food Preserver. You can go to our website and find out all about that application process and the program. Please like and follow us on social media, and you'll get lots of little tips there as well. We have a newsletter that you can subscribe to. It'll come into your box. And then, of course, you can ask a Master Food Preserver, not just at our monthly events, but also there's an online place where you can send in a question. And finally, please, if you're still here and you could help us out with our grant, basically, and also to know what works and doesn't work for you, please fill out the post-event survey. And thank you so very much for your time. All right. 7:40.
Okay, 2 things. 1, well, 3. Thank you again for joining us tonight.
Anyone?
2, technically, when this Zoom session ends and I officially click the end button, in your browser will be a pop-up of a survey. Now, if we continue talking, that could take some time. So I went ahead and put in the chat a link to the survey. So if you want to go ahead and click on it now and you don't trust your internet connection or technology, click on the chat right now. You can access the survey, open it up. Don't worry about duplicate responses. I can filter that at my end.
We have a handout.
Otherwise, yeah, and otherwise, if you have questions, I'm willing to stay on. I think the panel is willing to stay on a couple more minutes if you want to have questions. Otherwise, you're free to go. And thank you again for joining us tonight.
We have
That's
one
wonderful.
hand.
Unmute and speak up. Harold.
Hello, thank you very much for your presentation. It was extremely informative. I'm a novice to preserving. I'm very interested in learning how to dry persimmons. Any suggestions on where I can start from the very beginning, from kindergarten?
You can watch our November 14th program that's recorded. We talked about basic drying techniques, primarily using a dehydrator, although there are resources for being able to do, well, at this time of year, you're not going to get far with sun drying, even in California. There's oven drying is possible. It is more cumbersome and difficult, but that would be a good place to start, though. Hoshigaki, as you saw at the beginning of the presentation from Deirdre, is a whole nother ball of wax, but there's a more detailed presentation of that in the November program, which is on the YouTube.
Thank you.
And by the way, I think that drying persimmons is a great way to eat them. It makes them smaller, they're snackable, you get the flavor. You can do all sorts of fun things, and it's super easy. Other questions? Nina, are there any strays in the chat?
I see no other
inquiries that we've left?
questions in the chat. We I believe we covered them all, and I hope I didn't miss anybody. Good.
Happy to have anyone speak up now. You can, since anyone can grab the survey out of the chat, I don't feel as pressed for us to make sure that we can sign off, but people obviously should feel free to go as they need to. That's it. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you all so very much. I hope you enjoy the joy of persimmons. If you still have some that are getting ready to rot on your counter, I still have a dozen of them in various stages of going soft. Feel free to either make, as someone pointed out in the chat, a jam with the mushy hachias. You can find good recipes for that, or watch the November program for various ways that, freezing is a great way to preserve for later baking, for example. All that wonderful mushy orange stuff. Persimmons are tons.
You got a compliment on your artwork in the background.
Well, it's color coordinated with persimmons. That's a flamboyant tree in the Caribbean. All right. Thank you so much. Again, there will be a recipe handout for this, and you can access the materials from the first program as well. And have a wonderful holiday.